thing I want to talk about, because I've never really heard you talk too much about it, but you talked a little bit about it earlier, is you've kind of now have a bit of a reputation of like attempting to help people that have had back issues, right? Love Mark, Tiger, Day to extent, right? And I'm curious to know like the lengths you went. Obviously, when like Tiger was struggling with the short game, you're like, I got to figure this out. I'll, even ask some other experts what they're seeing, what they think's going on. Where did you go? I know a few names, like I know Stuart McGill, right? Maybe what is it, Guy Voyer? Like you were actively continuing to learn about the body, right? But what was your thought process when it's like, oh my gosh, I've got guys that have already had surgeries coming to me. How am I actually going to help them improve? Because this could go the wrong direction.
Yeah, I mean, again, it kind of goes back to like sort of the first part of our conversation. It's more of like how do I arm myself with as much of like sort of knowledge and understanding of like what goes into potentially hurting a back so that you're not kind of going more in that direction, as well as what are things you can do to either prevent back injury or sort of like attenuate whatever degradation is going to maybe inherently happen to the back. What are the things you could possibly do, and how do I, like, kind of like anything else, like you go in the golf swing world and there's obviously a lot of different opinions, right? I think you can find that with a lot of different disciplines, including physical therapy, back issues, whatever. So for me, it's like I want to hear as many different perspectives as possible. I want to find perspectives that are oftentimes like different than each other and try to like tease like, why is this guy who's got a PhD and this guy's got a PhD saying like kind of different things, like what's up here? Like, because to me that's where you can kind of really maybe tease out like some of the, like the core logic, or like be like, okay, let me try to make sense of this. So for me it's like, it's again, it goes back to the whole idea. It's like I'm not trying to like sound smart or air quotes like win an argument. I'm trying to like help a guy like reach his goals. And if that's what you're optimizing for, the last thing I want to do is put myself in an echo chamber. I want to find as diverse of like resources and opinions as possible, just to better kind of be like, okay, given as many different angles to look at this problem as possible, this is the one I'm going to go for because of this, this, and this. And I reserve the right to change course if new information that's added warrants an update of the overall approach and strategy that we're going to take. And this is where, like, and when I'm talking to a client, or whatever, like I know internally I feel this way, and then sometimes I'll verbalize it. But it's like I reserve the right to change my fucking mind. Like, because the one thing I'm going to promise you is that I'm going to do in my heart of hearts what I feel like is the right direction for us to go in. And if somehow that changes to what I said, a minute ago, I don't agree with anymore for some, new information, I'm not going to like dig in and be like, oh, I got to stick with what I said a minute ago or an hour ago or a year ago if I think this new sort of strategy is actually going to be better because of that. Now, this is where, it's like, oh, do you like change? Like, I think people could possibly take this and be like, oh, do you always change your method? And this is like your approach or your method. It's no, it's not that. And that's where again, it's like I always want to be super careful not to be like I believe in like this method, this method, this method. It's just purely how do I take in all this information and choose a game plan that I think is the best for this person at this given time.
And so when in thinking in terms of like protecting someone's back from a golf perspective, like ultimately, I think we would agree like golf probably isn't very good for your back in general,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
it's like, okay, I just probably have to focus on having as healthy a hips as possible,
Yeah.
right? Probably get as much T spine mobility,
Yeah.
right? And then all the muscles that are connected to your spine, right?
Yeah.
It's like, what else? What are my other options other than if there's some extreme pattern when I hit a ball, to your point earlier, a lot of lateral flexion or some of these other things? It's like, what else can you do? And maybe that even won't be enough.
Yeah.
It's golf, right?
Yeah. And then having like, good, like you're saying, like there's an inherent wear and tear. So like, do you have like, good sort of like therapy or like exercises that you're doing to kind of like,
Recovery,
get,
inflammation. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, slow down sort of that inherent kind of like wear and tear that's going to happen. So yeah, I mean, basically that. And then, if someone has a pattern where it's like, ooh, I could see that kind of pissing off your lower back or creating whatever sort of like injury potentially. Now, how do you make a swing change that this is where you get into matchups? They'll still matches up in a way to kind of hit, whatever shots you want to hit, but do it without sort of that previous kind of like back motion that you're familiar with. And that's where I think things get a little tricky, is where you try to start changing swings, especially if it's away from something that someone's like super familiar with and maybe has performed at a really high level with, but it's causing injury because now you're asking them to move away from a space that they've done really well with, and that's always a tough thing, because even though people don't want to be in pain, they also don't want to hit shots out of bounds. And I would argue that a professional golfer they might prefer to like blow out a disc than hit a ball than snap hook a ball out of bounds, not consciously, but like there's such a deep sort of like, I am not hitting it over there in professional golfers, sort of like their nervous system, if you will.
Yeah.